Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. You know, I took a break for this weekend. I haven't seen an uptick in this stuff, so it really is that I'm just doing this for myself and my friends that continually listen. Thank you for those of you that do take the time to listen. I continue to persist, though. And, today I wanted to talk about legacy in the 2A. I've talked about this a little bit in the past. Especially after working gun shows as much as I have lately, what I notice is that there's a legacy involved in the 2A that we need to talk about. A lot of us got into this, the pew-pew life, so to speak, to quote Colion Noir, because of our father, or our mother in some cases, maybe our uncle, And this weekend I got the fortune of, working another gun show and watching some older guys give some of that knowledge down that my dad gave to me. And it's priceless because, some of these guys, one of the guys that was working next to me, his name's Bill. Bill Peterson, actually. He used to own a reloading store and gun store in Gallup. And the guy has a heart of gold. Big-hearted guy. Knows a lot about guns, knows a lot about airplanes, Second World War warbirds, which reminds me of my dad and my uncle both. He's a big fan of the P-38. But what I was talking about with him is just, some of the stories he would tell me about some of the military surplus rifles he had on the table are some of the stories I'd heard from my dad and from my uncle. And, as we age... as I'm 46, I'll be 47 in December. I wonder what kind of knowledge we're about to lose from the generation before us. There's a lot to be said about the boomers, and it's time for us to take over and take over the reins and start, as Generation Xers that is, and start running the world. And that's kind of weird, considering we've always been the smallest, least heard generation in human history, especially in the United States. And now we're the leaders. We are the sages. We are perpetrating that, or passing down that knowledge that was poured into us. Not just in the 2A, but in everything. And it's a weird bit to flip, taking a piece from my IT career. When you flip a bit in, as far as data, you're saying that something needs to be archived, something needs to be backed up. And I think about these guys like Bill, and like my dad, and like my uncle, and some of the other guys I saw at the gun show that are older dudes. They're getting on in years. I talk to this guy pretty frequently at every gun show I see, including Bill, but this other dude. And he's 87 years old. My dad only made it to 80. But I will never forget my dad taking me to the first gun show ever. I'll never forget meeting up with my uncle at the gun show with my dad. And looking at all the guns that we couldn't afford, daydreaming. Specifically, my family has always collected military surplus guns because there's always been a history around it. I mean, we have newer guns, newer hardware, so to speak, newer calibers. And those are pretty much for hunting. The other ones we have in our collections always tell a story from history, Bill had an FN semi-automatic 8mm Egyptian, and he was going through the story of what it was and why it had a little crack in the stock. And I'm thinking, well, anybody who looks at mil surplus guns and knows anything about them knows that there's gonna be a story behind how that crack got there, and that you're not gonna find the most pristine examples of firearms that are mil surplus that you can afford, at least, because anything that's been used in combat or used as a military rifle in its day is going to have some wear and tear. And to me, that's always character. I've refinished stocks. Hindsight being what it is now, I don't know that I would ever refinish a stock again unless it's that bad and needs to be redone. One of the stocks I did in the past was just someone painted over it and tried to turn it into a parade gun when it really was never intended to be a parade gun. But I fixed that. And I brought it back to its original glory. But looking at some of the K98s that I remember my dad and myself working on and sanding them down, I don't think I'd do that anymore. Because I want to preserve the heritages. Each one of those dings is a story. Each one of those guns coming back in the white from military surplus. If you don't know what in the white means, it means where the bluing or parkerization on the metal is worn off. Some of my K98s, my 7mm Brazilian one, for instance, its parkerization wore off a long time ago. It's over 105 years old, I believe. You think about that. The legacy and history of that gun. It was in service for the Brazilian military for a long time. And the history that goes with it. The K98, the examples I have, I definitely saw service in Europe, possibly in Eastern Europe or the East, but they definitely saw combat. The M1 Garand I have right now, that Garand, that is my dad's. And I know just tracing its serial number, it was made, one of the first ones made, so it obviously had to meet its day in combat, What does that say? What's the legacy it has? Think about your lever gun that you inherited from your daddy or your grandpa and the bluing that's worn off of it. What story can your family tell about that rifle? What story do you know about that rifle? Because Lord knows, you've probably been on a hunt or two or been out shooting with that person that owned it before you, and you got to see it in use. Maybe, that old cowboy gun that I'm talking about rode in a saddle as they broke broncos or they herded cattle. Or maybe it was the one rifle your dad had or your grandpa had, and it rode in the back of a truck its entire life, but was used when it was needed to because it's a tool. That legacy is what I'm talking about. How do you hand that down to the next generation? Some of that is with knowledge. Some of it is with the stories, whether they're boastful or not. Let the audience decide that, if it's a boastful story or not. But that legacy is how we preserve the 2A. Burning those indelible marks on those youngsters that shows them what it's like to be a man, a guy that's actually into the 2A, or a woman that's heavily into the 2A. That as you're, there's a character of a person for most people in the 2A. That you find that they're not the type to say yes or no without a handshake. When our word is our bond. The Bible says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. But there's something to be said about that old school mentality of, I gave you my word. My word means something to me, and it should mean something to you. And if it don't, then I haven't reflected my character enough. And there's something about that in the 2A community that I know and love. There's a lot of politicians. Politicians usually are the ones that speak out both sides of their face, right? Their mouth. Those are the ones you don't listen to. But then you see people that are dyed-in-the-wool, true blue Americans. I talked to this other gentleman. He's in a wheelchair. And I see him at every gun show. He runs one of the booths. I finally heard the story of how he got in the wheelchair this last gun show because it was so slow. But the other thing I found out is the man is holding on to acreage in Colorado that was handed down for 3 generations now. And his brother and his sister are trying to get him to parse that up and sell it off, but he won't because he sees it as American legacy, as American heritage. What has happened to society when we are willing to take money over the heritage that you were willing to bestow on future generations? Part of the fight, part of the reason why I got in New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union was to preserve this right, this God-given right of self-defense for our future generations, because I'm hoping to plant seeds for trees that I will never enjoy the shade of, because this fight has to continue. This is something that means a lot to me because it's part of the American culture. It's part of the American experience. And despite what politicians, media personalities will say and demonize it, there's no demons in this. There are bad people that do bad things in all cultural aspects of our society today. And case in point, I call myself a libertarian ANCAP. Well, I just dropped the libertarian off of it after tonight. That's because I found out who the Libertarian Party hoisted up as their presidential nominee, a gay communist. I don't have any problem with the gay part, but I damn sure have a problem with being a communist, especially for a party that exposes freedom. That's something I'm not okay with. I still believe Jesus is a libertarian. I believe he's an ANCAP too. And what I mean is that you're supposed to have ultimate free will. Whether you believe it or not, that's on you. There's nothing wrong with that. But having free will to decide and having the mind to be able to grasp concepts that people that are indoctrinated into ways of thinking tend not to do is a big deal. You watch people both on the left and the right march in lockstep with their chosen party and their chosen ideology. And to me, that's always dangerous because I think about those lessons I learned from these guys in the 2A. That's how Hitler and Mao and Pol Pot took over power. They sat there, they gathered their group around them, used them as useful idiots to gain power, and then disposed of them. Is that not what today's American politicians are doing right now? You're watching the American people divide themselves, and we're in that awkward phase where we're trying to reshuffle the parties, I think. But we're allowing mass media and media personalities, people that don't actually have any real brain. And I say that because all they care about is towing the party line. And they're the ones telling you to get rid of your guns. They're the ones that are telling you that you have no right to self-defense. What they're saying is, I hate you, and that I hope you die, because you have no right to defend yourself. And if I ever get into enough power, that they're going to use that power against us. And I have a problem with that. And I think most of my listeners, what few I do have, would agree with that. It's not okay. I will not go quietly into that good night when it comes to my rights and what I believe. And while you and I may not ever agree 100%, I think you agree with me on a lot of things when it comes to what is right, what's wrong is wrong. There's something about writing for the brand of what is an American. That legacy that I'm talking about. I've seen several articles in this last week while I was at the gun show because it was really, really slow. I read some. They were talking about how old school manners date you. They date you showing your age. You know what? If shaking a man's hand while standing and shaking it firmly says that I'm old, absolutely. Holding a door open for someone else, that means I'm old, I'm going to do it. I'm an old guy. I don't care anymore. Point is that the manners that were handed down to me are part of the legacy, all-encompassing legacy that I got. Just as much as I got that, I got the 2A. So I don't understand seeing these idiots like Diddlebach or Diddlebite, whatever the hell he is, the ATF chief right now, get in front of Congress and shuffle and stammer as they ask questions of him because he's trying to backpedal and figure out how to answer the questions without incriminating himself to go to jail or be in contempt because he knows he's lying and that the ATF is actually going after your rights. There's currently a stay right now on the FFL rule. So what that means is that I've talked about it briefly. What the expansion of that is, if you sold one gun, sold two, maybe sold 5, and you earned any type of profit, and that's a very nebulous term in the rule set that they gave, you can now be found as a felon because you didn't have an FFL to sell that one to whatever nebulous number, second nebulous thing in that rule that the ATF had pushed down. Because you're not an FFL. You didn't buy a license to sell guns. Now, to me, an FFL person is someone who makes it their profession to sell firearms. You know, selling a piece of property has never been a federal crime. And that's how I see a firearm. To me, I see it no different as a wrench. So selling someone a wrench, why would that put me in jail? But it can now, or it could have. You know, and what was interesting was watching these congressmen go after him on the other things that the ATF's been doing. You know, trying to rewrite laws and turn American citizens into criminals. You know, that's not right. That's not American. But the longer we sit back on our laurels, the longer we sit back and watch without taking action, without getting active in this arena, the more likely they'll try to pull your rights away. And you know, as much as I understand not making a lot of stink because it doesn't really matter, because you'll do what you're going to do anyway, because that's what men do, real men. They're going to do what's right no matter what. The law isn't going to influence us, because the law, if it ever came to a point where it was said to do something, even though it was 100% wrong, those of us that actually have some integrity, we're not going to do it. That's part of being a man. That's part of being an American, is saying no. Being one of those rugged individuals that actually stands up for what they believe in. So as I think about legacy and how we're passing it down, you know, how I'm passing it down to my kids, and I'm seeing it. You know, I'm seeing it in my sons and my daughter. I'm watching them reflect some things, sometimes not always good things from me, but, you know, nonetheless, they are parts of me. I can see the legacy I'm leaving. You know, when I talk to my friends and they see the passion I have for certain things, I can see the legacy I'm leaving. So I hope you figure out what legacy you're leaving and keep leaning in hard to that. Because in the end, no matter what you leave someone, what they're going to remember are the lessons and those free moments with you. That's all that matters. Like, share, subscribe. Most importantly, be great.